Ryan Buckner with Schellman here. Hey, can you keep a secret? Well, in this very next installment of the Truth Series, I met with a very special friend and colleague who not only is a subject matter expert in the privacy field, but also Schellman's privacy practice leader. Welcome, Chris. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Ryan.
We're going to have some fun today. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. How long have you been with Schellman?
Been with Schellman about 6 years now.
Well, 6 years. Okay. Favorite color?
Oh, green.
Green.
Yeah.
Okay. What city do you operate out of?
I am based out of Atlanta, Georgia.
What's your mother's maiden name?
Oh gosh, that's private information.
Bingo. See how easy it can be sometimes, right?
Yeah.
We put a lot of information on social media. It doesn't matter what social media app you have. My daughter oftentimes reminds me, hey, are you sure you want to put that out there? We've got so much social media. What does privacy even mean? Before we get into the complex or the complicated aspects of, cybersecurity and privacy within organizations, can you just give us a plain English explanation of what privacy really means to businesses?
Well, privacy to businesses is an important factor going forward. It's really, ultimately, privacy it relates to the individual. It relates to, for organizations, that's an end user, it's an employee. But ultimately, privacy is something that is important and it's innate to every single person and who they are. So for organizations, it's multifaceted, right? Because not only do you have, customers that you're doing business with, where you're, they're concerned about the privacy of their information and their end users, their individuals. But as an organization, you've got employees, right? So, John Smith, maybe he doesn't want you collecting all of the data that he's browsing on his computer.
That's right.
Doesn't want you to know, when he's having his next kid. So it's information that individuals have a right to keep close to their chest, because ultimately at the end of the day, it helps define who they are.
That's right.
And organizations nowadays, since privacy has become a thing,
That's right.
are now responsible for helping individuals protect that privacy.
You mentioned a few words in there multiple times. Individuals, identity, define. Those are important concepts. We're going to come back to those in a bit. But I did have a question come up in my mind as you were describing that. Oftentimes organizations will conflate privacy and the individual's data with just sort of the general business data. And they sometimes will merge the two together to where it doesn't matter if it's an individual or a customer or a shipping address or an order, whatever the case may be, they just sort of conflate the two together. But there is a difference between personally identifiable information and just sort of your general run-of-the-mill business information that has to remain confidential. Is that right?
Yes, that is a very common, misconception, is that all confidential data, kind of privacy data, it's the same, but it's not.
That's right.
Ultimately, confidential information, yes, it can be, secretive, a little bit more sensitive from a business perspective, but if it doesn't tie back directly to an individual, the privacy aspect isn't there.
That's right.
The difference in sensitivity for private data, again, it's focused more on the individual and tying back to the actual person. And potentially, when aggregated with other data elements, it becomes a much larger deal than just knowing a name, an address, a birth date. If it's combined with a lot of other factors, this is how identity theft happens. This is how a lot of other bad things are occurring in the world now.
That's right. Fair enough. All right. So we got another question here for you. Perhaps maybe in the federal space, I've never seen so many acronyms. GDPR, CCPA,
right.
APEC, which is another acronym, the CBPR, etc. MSDPR.
Right.
Pick two. You only get two.
Oh, gosh.
Give me a plain English understanding of what those things are.
Okay, so first one I would have to say, the big one, right, is GDPR. It's the General Data Protection Regulation of 2016. So it became effective in 2018. It was the EU's comprehensive approach to just overhauling privacy. And it's something that is not only, applies in the EU, but it applies elsewhere. It applies with anyone doing business with the EU. So it ultimately was put together to help protect EU residents, citizens, etc., those individuals in the EU and help ensure that not only the data is protected there,
That's right.
of a sensitive nature, but also if it's shipped, out to any other companies that are helping, process that information in the U.S., Asia, South America, wherever it is, that they're ensuring the same protections, making sure that their citizens, their residents are protected not only where they reside or where they're located, but around the world, because at the end of the day, you've got businesses collecting data from all over. So
Let's explore that just for a second before you go to your next acronym here. Residents, whether they're actually within the EU or even if those residents that are permanent residents of the EU, but if they are abroad, does it travel? Do their rights and privileges or protection travel with them?
So there are aspects to territorial scope with GDPR. Ultimately, it protects data originating in the EU on those residents. So ultimately, if you have, say you have a joint citizenship with maybe the U.S. and say Germany, if you're in the U.S., if you're living in the U.S. and that data originates in the U.S.,
got it.
It's not in scope. If you're in the EU, if you're back home in Germany, that's where, if that data comes out of Germany, out of the EU, then that GDPR territorial scope kind of follows that data wherever it may go.
Got it. Okay, so GDPR, that's one. What's your next one?
Next one's probably APEC. APEC, CBPR, PRP system, a lot of acronyms there.
Wow. APEC, CBPR, PRP.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's two different systems there. Heretofore, rather, it's going to be changing going forward a little bit, which is good. But APEC relates to the Asia Pacific economies of commerce.
Sure.
Ultimately 9 member economies that bought into the system. It wasn't originally 9, but we've kind of added more over time. What happened was they kind of saw a need for privacy requirements, cross-border data transfer.
Similar to GDPR.
Similar to GDPR,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Not as strict or not as specific of requirements. This was actually originally stood up early, 2011, 2013, etc.
Oh, so before GDPR.
Before GDPR,
Okay.
so it didn't have a lot of those same definitions, requirements, but CBPR is the cross-border privacy rules.
Okay.
PRP is privacy recognition for processors.
Okay, privacy recognition for processors.
Yes.
I'm going to come back to that processor question, but keep going.
Okay.
All right.
So what those systems do is whether you're looking at this from and I know this is going to lead into more questions, but if you're in a controller role for CBPR, that applies to you. If you're in a processor role, PRP applies to you. But ultimately what it does is it looks at a set of requirements based on your role there and make sure that either you are correctly processing and safeguarding information from a controller standpoint and notifying them of their rights, or if you're on the processor side, basically for any information, personal information that you ingest as a company for those services, that you're protecting that on behalf of your customers.
So it seems in many ways to be very similar to the EU's GDPR. It's just for a different region.
Very similar. Both the GDPR and the APEC, CBPR, PRP systems kind of at their base use the OECD privacy principles, which have been around for much longer than that.
That's right.
So there's kind of some core principles that are underlying both of these. So that even though the requirements themselves may be a little different,
That's right.
the concepts are the same.
That's right. Interesting. All right, so you mentioned processor and you also mentioned controller. And I've had enough front row seats to those types of debates. Without saying who cares, because obviously there's a distinction, can you just elaborate a little bit on what the distinction is between a processor and a controller in the context of privacy compliance?
Yes. So those concepts basically came around with GDPR. I mean, they've always been a thing, but we actually put some naming to them.
I see.
Ultimately, I kind of view it, I'm a little bit of like a handyman, I guess. I got it from my dad, way back when. But, construction related, right? So you've got, say you're doing a home renovation or something like that. You've got a GC, a general contractor, that's kind of coordinating the efforts. You've got contractors underneath.
Sure.
GC is kind of determining who does what, when they do it, what they're doing, etc.
Yeah.
That's more of a controller side.
Yes.
So if you picture the data moving through that process, he's
right.
kind of weaving, making sure everything stays on schedule, doing as he sees fit for his purposes to get to that end goal.
That's right.
He does, throughout that process, employ contractors.
That's right.
Subcontractors. So those subcontractors, they operate more in the processor role. So the GC hires them to do a job. They do the job in accordance with the specifications. They're done. So really, it's just safeguarding while they're there. If we're looking at the data perspective, and then at the end of the day, that's kind of where the liability ends. Now, to throw a wrench in things, of course, because we got to do that with privacy.
Metaphorically speaking.
yes. With the GC, now there's also a component there because he could be operating as a process, like say, I hired that GC.
Oh, I see.
So he's doing what I want him to do. Now, if an organization kind of operates in that role, there are certain areas where they could be a processor for one sort of the processing and the services provided.
I see.
They could be a controller for others. So, for example, maybe the GC is like, hey, I told him I want a new roof. Okay, perfect. I'll get you a new roof. But then I say, hey, I kind of want this room to be an entertainment room. I don't know what I want it to look like, but just go with it. He's got full flexibility there. He determines what it looks like, who to hire, what to get done.
That's right.
So there's flexibility there, and he takes on a little bit more of that liability because he has, more wiggle room. He makes more of the decisions. He determines what to do with it.
That's right.
So if you're just given like a general direction, but then you use that data, for your own purposes, or maybe you have that flexibility,
right.
that space to make those decisions, then you could be in that control role as well.
It's the way you describe it is almost as though it is a matter of fact, not a matter of election. Like you don't elect to be treated as a processor or elect to be treated as a controller, and therefore you pick and choose, sort of what compliance requirements are going to be applicable to you. If you do certain things with the data, then you are X. If you do other things, then you're Y. But you can be both.
Yes,
right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Typically, you can be both, not necessarily for the same data, the same processing, but for different parts, then yes. And it's all legal driven. So ultimately, how the GDPR and how all of these privacy, frameworks and regulations work is that the buck stops at a certain level. That's going to be your main controller. Now, depending on who they have relationships with, from a legal
That's right.
standpoint, they'll either contract with somebody and then stipulate, hey, you're a processor, you need to do this, or they'll contract with someone and say, we're giving you guys, leeway to figure out the processing and everything. Maybe it's a controller to controller relationship or a joint controller relationship.
I see.
Just another wrench in there.
That's right.
Where you're processing and both of you are kind of figuring out exactly what you want to use and how you want to process.
Talk to me a little bit about that question, because it seems as though that may be one of the very first questions that needs to be answered. What role are you operating in? Is that something that you find is a difficult question for clients to navigate through? Do they already have in their mind, hey, I'm a controller or I'm a processor, right? Talk to me a little bit about sort of the initial conversations that you've experienced over time here. Has it been one fairly contentious sometimes, or is it, no, we only want to be treated and viewed as a processor and not a controller?
Right, that's a great question. And I would say it ultimately depends on the maturity of the privacy program and kind of how they've thought through that, because at the end of the day, normally what it boils down to is contractual obligations and commitments. So, if you have customers that are stipulating that you're a processor, at the end of the day, if you sign off on that, you're processing for them.
That's right.
Or if you're in a controller role, it's the same thing.
That's right.
Now, typically, I will say organizations, of course, like to be in the processor role because there's less obligations that come with that.
Oh, okay.
But at the end, at the same time, I would say that there are certain aspects where you can't get away with just being a processor. So you have employees at your organization. You're a controller for your employees. So all organizations are going to have kind of multiple aspects and multiple roles that they fit. For those privacy frameworks and regulations, it's up to their legal team, contracting, to figure out what those roles are in accordance with the regulations.
That's right. Yeah, certainly some strategy to be considered there. What about just avoiding it altogether? Let's say you mentioned APEC, you mentioned the EU. You've got a domestic organization, you've got an organization here in the United States, and they say, hey, you know what? We don't want to be subject to any of those, right?
Right.
Can they just avoid privacy altogether, avoid privacy compliance?
I think most organizations would love that. It's not feasible in this day and age with how things are progressing. There's a couple of different considerations there, right? Because yes, you can kind of pull back and make sure don't want to operate in that jurisdiction because they have very complex privacy regulations. If you do that though, you're limiting the growth of your business. So
that's right.
It's twofold. And naturally, as you grow and as you expand, you're gonna come to find out there's really not a way to limit
That's
that.
Right.
At the end of the day, even if you're not operating in Japan, for example, they have their own acronym in privacy law. If you're not operating in Japan, you may have customers that are, right? So those customers are required to meet those privacy legislations, and then as a component of your contracting process, they've probably pushed some of those obligations to you as well.
That's right. And you were talking earlier about, the fact that you have employees,
Correct.
et cetera. So there really is no safe haven, as it were. There's no way to escape.
No. There's some limits from the service delivery side, maybe, but internally, to your point, you're always going to have employees.
That's right.
And depending on where those employees are located, you're going to have to deal with different jurisdictions, different requirements, et cetera.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Chris, I'm out of questions for now.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time. Very
Absolutely.
helpful. Perhaps in a future session, we can talk a little bit more about some of the other acronyms that we didn't have a chance to get through.
I have a lot, so that would be great.
All right. Thanks so much, Chris. Well, that's the Truth Series, folks, where we strive to get simple answers to complex questions. If you have any other questions related to privacy or any other compliance objective, reach out to us.